Hello, I'm Jane Robertson, the Director of Communications and Content for Frog Systems, the creators of employee wellbeing streaming service Ashia. Thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation about how to support employees who have experienced baby loss. Our conversation today will be open and honest and therefore is likely to include some sensitive and potentially upsetting details. So do please feel free to opt out at any stage. Sadly, 50% of UK adults have experienced or been impacted by baby loss or pregnancy loss. Of those who have had to balance work alongside their grief, half say they did not feel supported by their managers or colleagues. Those who feel unsupported often decide to take significant time off or even leave their job completely. And understandably, many managers feel very ill-equipped to provide the right help. We're going to look at what you can do to provide a supportive culture with insight from two working women who, as a result of their own experience of baby loss, have helped their employers to make positive changes. Daria Preston co-leads the fertility, pregnancy and baby loss community at the Bank of England. Daria led on the introduction of the bank's parental bereavement leave and pay policy and is helping to shape the bank's culture, leading the way for other companies to do the same. Thanks for joining us, Daria.
Thank you.
And Donna Wayman is the Chief Operating Officer at Zurich Legacy Solutions and a trustee at Aching Arms, which is a baby loss charity that provides comfort bears and support for bereaved parents alongside workplace staff training and policy guidance. Thanks for joining us today, Donna.
Hiya.
And as always, we welcome your questions. So please do post anything that you'd like to ask us in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as the conversation progresses. So I think what I'd like to do really is to start with why our guests today feel that it's so important that employers and managers are better informed about this. Daria, perhaps I could start with you. Why is it so important to get this message out?
I think number one is just there's such a lack of awareness and understanding around this topic, and it's got a lot better, but there are still taboos that need to be broken. And even in this day and age, I'm still seeing some of the sort of common pitfalls still happening around workplace support. So I think we're not quite there yet. We also don't have a statutory policy, and until that really happens, there's a kind of catch up that's happening in workplaces in terms of their culture.
And Donna, this has become so important to you as well, hasn't it, in the workplace, that workplace training and support?
Absolutely. I think the latest research shows us that the impact of a loss of a baby just has such a profound impact on mental health for such a long period of time. And that's not something that is just kind of done and over with. It's far longer and much further reaching than that. And as Daria said, whilst there is no statutory policy for that leave, we know that less than a third of organisations currently have policies related to baby or pregnancy loss. And we know that a huge number of people leave jobs because they're unhappy after the way they've been treated during the loss of a baby. I also think in the world that we work, where we want people to be present and motivated, you need people to feel like they're cared for and that they have the right wellbeing services around them. And we also, when we look at inclusion and diversity in the workplace, keeping the right people and women in the workplace, they need that kind of support, and it's important to them to know that it's there. I also feel really strongly that it's got to be a proactive conversation, because, you never know when you might pick up the phone to one of your members of staff to tell you they've had some horrible news, and you need to be prepared in advance to be able to say something that is tactful and supportive, and know what you have behind you from a policy perspective to support that employee.
Thank you both for explaining that. So what we're going to do, and Daria and Donna, you very kindly agreed to share some of your experience as well as your insight and what you've been through personally. So perhaps we could sort of look at that in a little bit more detail, and then we'll work our way through that workplace experience. So Donna, can you tell us about what you went through, please?
Yeah, so just over 10 years ago, I was pregnant, and I had to make that phone call to my boss, who didn't know I was pregnant, to tell him that I was, and that my baby was very poorly, and I didn't know what was going to happen and when I'd be back at work. And sadly, I lost my daughter Violet during that pregnancy, and had to take several months off work to recover. It was before 24 weeks, so I wasn't entitled officially to any leave, but thankfully was, looked after and treated in a really careful and thoughtful manner by my manager and my team at that time, and spent a few months off recovering physically and emotionally, and then made a phased return to work to get myself back into the workplace again. I'm really lucky that I went on to have a daughter afterwards. I have a son before as well, but actually the support through that subsequent pregnancy was just as important as the support I had when I lost Violet. So having that, and I think that's why I feel like it's so important that we have the right care, because I was very lucky to be treated wonderfully through such an awful experience, but it was down to the manager at the time and the person that I was with. And we know from speaking to other volunteers and trustees at Aching Arms that a lot of people don't have that care and compassion that they really need at that time.
Thank you, Donna. Daria, you were, unlike Donna, you were very visibly pregnant because your loss happened very late on in your pregnancy, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm the biggest oversharer as well. So there wasn't a single person that didn't know I was having a baby. I mean, even in, so I was a very late term loss. I'd gone past my due date. So I mean, baby loss, pregnancy loss, stillbirth was never in my vocabulary. It just was not something I expected would happen to me. And so it was just it was like a trapdoor, pure devastation. What do I do now? Oh, right, I have to give birth to a baby that has sadly passed away. So I was 41 weeks and 2 days. So 9 days past my due date. I'd already gone off on maternity leave, so slightly different, I suppose, to I have had an early loss as well in the past, but this was, just that end of the spectrum that you just would not expect something awful to happen. And, I have to live with that. It's quite traumatic knowing that you carried a baby for that long who almost made it. And a lot of the times you don't learn about this until in hindsight, once you've had a post-mortem and things like that. But I gave birth to a beautiful girl called Paloma. She was completely perfect. And I was a low-risk pregnancy. So it was very much a shock and out of the blue for me. And, I genuinely thought that was it for me. I just could not see a world where I would be existing and living again. To be quite honest, sort of from a mental health perspective, how this has to be the cruelest thing that could ever happen. So this was 5 years ago, which feels like a lifetime ago, but also when I think about it, I can visualize every little detail, and I think that comes with that kind of trauma. But yeah, it was a long time ago. And I guess for me, I had to find an outlet for this grief, and that has been trying to channel it into making change and making positive change. It also opened a world for me that I had never been in before, which is baby loss, which is almost like an underworld of women and also families and partners. And before you know it, there's like an underground network almost of people, and you start to collect these people into your life. So I've almost formed a new life from this loss as well, but which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, it was very traumatic. And as I say, I think even myself being misinformed and the misconceptions I had, I would compare losses. But I've come such a long way now in realizing through meeting other women like Donna and other people as well, that even though the circumstances around our loss are very different, the way that we feel, the way we grieve, the way we love, these were much wanted pregnancies, much wanted babies. And I've also learned about the impact that it reverberates throughout the entire family. There wasn't a single family member that was not flawed, devastated and impacted by my loss. So huge impact.
And Daria, Donna was saying that she feels positive about the support that she was offered. She had that call with the line manager that seemed to resonate at the time, the right language was used, but we know that that doesn't necessarily happen for everybody, does it? What can I ask you what your experience was like when you had to tell work that this had happened?
Well, I have a few friends that work at the Bank of England. So at the time, I was lucky that I could ask a friend who was working there to kind of go away and get the information for me, if that makes sense. And I work in a project change environment, so I don't always have a BAU role. I move around in the nature of what I do. And I know a lot of people that work in that sort of ever-changing role or different contracts, you don't always have that continuity of relationships. So there wasn't a single person I could really go to, a trusted line manager as such. And I do remember logging in. I mean, the crazy things you do in the immediate throes of your loss. I remember logging in and searching baby loss in the intranet search bar, desperately looking for something, someone. I did contact my HR department. That was my first point of call. We have a really supportive sort of maternity service. And at that point, I was on maternity. So that's kind of where I went with that. And the response was really kind, empathetic, but I soon transpired there was not a policy. There was not guidance. There was not a document. There was not anything that came back in my search results. And so it very quickly in real time was impacting me. But I mean, in terms of the people, they were very kind and supportive, but it was an unknown at that point.
Yeah. And that word maternity, Donna, that's probably the last word that you want to hear at that stage when you're looking for some kind of support internally within the organisation, potentially.
We find so often when we help, when Aching Arms help organisations with their policies, which is something that we do, that a baby loss policy is in the back of a maternity policy. And that is a really horrible place to go if you've lost a baby. And even more so with the real cutoff between pre-24 and post-24 week losses, where you could be 23 weeks and 5-6 days, lose a baby and be entitled to none of your maternity leave. And then you're lost because you don't know what you are entitled to. So I think having the policies in place are really important. So you can write it in the search bar and find something, but it's also about having that empathetic leadership, HR teams, line managers that not only know how to enact policy, but know what to say and how to engage with somebody who's going through that kind of a loss.
Well, let's come back to the policy side of it in a moment and talk about that first point of call with your employer then. So Donna, you had to phone up. You hadn't told anybody in your team, I believe, or your line manager that you were pregnant. So can you talk us through how that conversation, it must, from the person who's lost the baby, it must be terrible to have to have the courage to make that phone call, or as Daria said, maybe get somebody to make that call on your behalf. But then at some stage you do have to have that call, don't you? And what's the right language? What's the right approach for that first contact to happen?
I think in a lot of cases of baby loss in earlier days or during the process, it can be quite uncertain as to how that pregnancy is going to proceed. It's not often immediately that you know that that's the outcome. So listening to what's being said by the employee and really taking in what they're saying. But the most important thing, I think, is that unconditional kind of take what you need and having the ability to say, I know you might not know what's going to happen, but you've got our support and have all the time that you need, and taking their lead in terms of checking back in. So, you don't want to be saying to people, call me every day and tell me what's going on. You want to say, shall we speak next week? Does that feel okay? Or, taking their lead, what do they need and how are they talking about their experience and reflecting that back to them? A lot of the parents we work with tell us that not having, once you've lost a baby and if you're phoning up to tell them about a loss, not having that acknowledged is really difficult. So if you don't know what to say, saying you're sorry is a great place to start, and just recognizing that it's really difficult for them. We always say that sending simple texts or emails or cards saying you're thinking about people is really important, and people really appreciate that. And also taking the lead of using a baby's name if they have used a name, if they've come and told you about what's happened. We also talk about, so I sent a message to my boss once we'd had Violet and she died, that I wanted my team to know, and I wanted that to be my words, but I wanted them to know before I came back. So, you know, thinking about how you want that to be positioned and what you want to be said about it and how you want to be treated on your return. So I think it's really just about listening to what the individual's saying, giving them options if they don't really know what they want, because quite often they won't, and thinking about how do you make it really easy for them to concentrate on being at home, because the recovery is physical and it is psychological, and they need time for both of those things.
Yeah. And can I ask you about the moment that you did decide to go back to your office, Donna? Because that was a very difficult experience that you had.
Yeah, I'd had a miscarriage before my pregnancy with Violet, and I hadn't told anybody about that either. And I'd had a miscarriage on a Friday and gone back to work on a Monday. My choice. I was like, get on with it. It's fine. I really thought I could do the same after I lost Violet. And once I'd got through the physical recovery, which took several weeks, and that was a surprise in itself, I really just thought I could go back to work. So I made arrangements to go into the office. I'd probably been off for about 4 or 5 weeks by that point. Hadn't had a funeral or anything yet. That was still to come. But I thought, no, I'll go back. I'm really driven. I'm work motivated. It'll be good for me. And I walked into the office, and there's a really nice gentleman that was on security on the gates. And he said to me, "Oh, Donna, how are you? I haven't seen you for ages. How are you?" And I literally was just like, couldn't speak, walked in through the gates, went to the toilet, composed myself, turned around and walked back out and went home. And I didn't go back to work then for another, well, after the funeral. So it was another good 2 months before I managed to go back. And when I did, I made sure I knew who I was meeting, what time I was meeting them, that I was only going in for a couple of hours, not for a full day, and really kind of phase that return back. And I think things like that are really, really important to help somebody that wants to come back into the office after they've lost a baby.
Yeah. And you're both in very large organisations. So Daria, you know, Bank of England has obviously got, you know, thousands of staff as well. It's that one moment, isn't it, where you may be going to meet somebody who you don't work closely with, but they may just say the wrong thing at the wrong time, use the wrong language, and it sets you back completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember going back into work. I can completely resonate with what Donna's just said, and not bracing myself for even standing at the lift around people who were about to be in very close proximity to me, who were going to ask, because they haven't seen me in a while. I've been gone for 6 months at this point. I've taken off 6 months because I had passed the 24-week statutory mark. So lucky me, I did get to go on maternity leave. But obviously I'm back much earlier than maybe I'd planned. And I think people just accepted, oh, you've had your baby, because we haven't heard from you. Having to navigate those conversations, I ended up having to repeat myself a lot, which was, I persevered with it. But I do remember someone in IT, because I had to go and get my laptop reactivated, saying to me, "Oh, my wife had that too." And it's just an example of how people want to kind of relate to your experience. You know, "Oh no, I lost the baby. Oh yeah, we had that too." And it's kind of like that comparison of grief, especially when you're fresh in it, isn't helpful. And then I felt the real strong urge to kind of justify my loss. So then I mean, looking back, you do things you just wouldn't do. But I remember walking around showing people pictures of my dead baby, because to me, I wanted to prove she was real. She was here. She didn't evaporate. It wasn't, you know, because there's this, again, back to the sort of misconceptions. You know, you had a little period, you had a little loss, you know. No, this was traumatic. I had a perfect baby girl, and I felt that real urge to justify it everywhere I went. And yeah, it was the little things, like preparing to get in the lift, going into a team meeting, and you know, you do the small talk around the table, and someone might say, "Oh, you're back from maternity leave," not knowing. It's the gaps in who knows and who doesn't know. So but having been completely unprepared for that, really. And I did, as I say, I've learned a lot through that experience in terms of what you can do to make things easier for yourself, and not go home, you know, crying all the way home on the train. You know, there are practical things we can do to put in place. And I think a good example is sensitive communications. I think Donna just touched on it, but being really clear, you know, what language you want to use. Also, you know, making sure that people have they know about the loss, and they know that especially with me, I wanted people to contact me. I found comfort in that. Some people don't, but I found comfort in hearing, I'm sorry to hear your news, I'm thinking of you. Other people might not want any contact, but you navigate these things through experience. And I suppose that's what we're doing here today is, unfortunately, you don't know until you're in that awful circumstance. And so we've been through it, and I guess it's putting that into positive practice. And for me, it was policy development, which was the big missing piece of the jigsaw that I saw on my return to work.
So let's talk about. Yeah, sorry, Donna.
I was just going to jump in and say, Daria and I obviously come at this from a very similar angle, where we really want to talk about, and I wanted people to know, but there's very many people out there who do not want people to know. They want it to be a secret, and that's their choice. So I think it's really important that leaders and HR professionals listen to the individual. If they want to just say that they've been off sick, that's right for them. And I think you've got to take that lead and think about how you navigate it in that circumstance. So yeah, I just wanted to caveat, because we're coming at it from a similar angle.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about there will be other challenges that arise therefore in the workplace once you're back, whether you've decided to let people know or not. I'm interested to know about telling team members. Obviously, you said that some people just wouldn't want anybody to know. That might be problematic, I guess. But anyway, let's talk about that. But what are the other challenges, Donna, that are going to crop up once you're back to work as well?
I think people often think baby loss is like a singular experience that happens in a little bubble of time and then is gone away and you're better, but that really isn't what it's like at all. So when you look at challenges later on, people obviously normally have a real desire to be pregnant and may not be able to do that easily afterwards, or may get pregnant. And then, like me, I was absolutely terrified for my entire pregnancy that something awful was going to happen, even though there was no actual reason why it should. So I think understanding the anxiety that comes with wanting to be pregnant again and perhaps then being pregnant. Anniversaries are really, really difficult. I'm 10 years on and I still feel slightly flawed on Violet's birthday every year. That they're hard. So I think thinking about those times and how do you remember those dates and just check in and make sure that person is okay, and is there anything you can do to help them? And I also think just the environment you're in. I remember one of my colleagues was very heavily pregnant with a due date very similar to what I would have been, and I kind of had to sit beside her and watch her pregnancy progress whilst mine hadn't. And I was desperately happy for her, but also really, really upset for myself. But, sensitive questions. So I was asked on her last day, did I want to be in the office? Did I want to come to her kind of leaving baby party? And I said, actually, no, I don't want to go. And I spoke to her and she understood, and it was, absolutely fine. But thinking about those things that might be triggering and thinking, how do I give this individual a choice to make the best decision? And for other people, it might have been to be there. That was important to them. But, giving choices, giving options is really important, and also giving safe spaces for a longer period. So who do they have that they can go to if they're having a bad day? Who can they talk to? How can they get themselves out of a situation if they're finding it really difficult? Where's their safe space to go? Things like that can be really helpful, because those triggers and waves of grief just keep coming, and they can be when you least expect it as well as when you do expect it.
Daria, the challenges that Donna's outlined are many, and it's something that never goes away, obviously. How difficult is it in an organisation today where you might not be face to face with people, you might be working remotely? How can an organisation support somebody that maybe is not going back into the office and is sitting here like we are today, chatting on a screen? Does the support that you need to offer vary and differ because of that?
I think we've adapted the workplace quite well since sort of COVID times anyway. So a lot of the work that we do is sort of split across being in office and also on camera. There were some specific things. So we developed a policy which we'll talk about, around specific provision for baby loss in the workplace, so that, like Donna said, it's not attached to a maternity leave policy. but I think also the guidance was, it's almost useless to have just a policy in and of itself. You need to have really good guidance that has been socialized, that has been communicated, and that people are engaged in. And that takes time. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you know, we implemented it day one and then day two, everybody's using it effectively. Of course, that doesn't happen, because there is that sort of change journey that needs to happen culturally, but also practically. People don't often engage with things like this until point of need, and at which point that can almost be too late, because if you're dropping the wrong language and you're sort of not enacting the levers that you have in a timely fashion, then, you know, you're giving people the wrong advice. It's really dangerous. One of the things that we put in the guidance, though, coming back to your point around sort of working flexibly, different patterns and people working from home, was being really conscious of the fact that people might not want to go on camera, for example. They may not also want to come into the office. I know that I personally thrived in an environment where I was in my own home, with my surroundings, with my support network close by. And especially going through pregnancy after loss, I found that really comforting, not having to drag myself in on the train as much. And I think having a policy and a guidance document that allows that flexibility, or dictates how much flexibility there is. Someone needs to think these things through. And yeah, so having sort of greater flexibility, the ability to go off camera, some of the things that Donna touched on as well, sort of language, but also if there are other pregnant members of team, and just really being very conscious about someone who is going through pregnancy after loss as well, making sure that all the support is signposted. We're really lucky to have on-site bank counsellors that work virtually. So having weekly sessions with the counsellor, for example, which is a huge benefit to our organisation. I know not all organisations have that, but okay, you might have private healthcare. What's in the private healthcare policy that we can enact as well, that we can point people towards? So really just channeling all of that information, but it really is down to the line manager, unfortunately, to be that kind of gatekeeper as well, and really communicating that back, which is why I think it's not just enough to have the policy. We have to have the guidance, but also has it been socialized, and have people gone to awareness sessions. So what the tagline that I use consistently when talking about our training and our guidance is, don't engage with this because this has been, you have been impacted by this in some way. Engage with this because you haven't. I want people to come along and learn about this because this is new territory, or perhaps one day they might end up managing someone that's going through this. The likelihood, the data is all pointing in that direction. So don't engage with this because you haven't experienced. Engage with this almost for the opposite reason, because you want to learn more about it, so that it's not just reliance on a point of need. And you know, you're really putting all the onus on the person that is going through the baby loss, and that the impact of what happens in that aftermath is crucial. So how you're treated in those early days can have a profound effect for how you feel about returning to work. So I think really important and difficult to do, but you know, we've adjusted to these different working patterns. I almost feel like there is always a workaround now.
Yeah. So it's about educating yourself really within your workplace, especially if you are somebody who has to manage other people, because this is more than likely to be something that you will have to deal with at some stage. So let's talk about policy then. Donna, perhaps we could start with you in terms of, what does good policy look like for an organisation of your size, and what are the statutory, what are you entitled to as a statutory thing, and what actually do you think you should be entitled to through a larger employee?
I think the point I made earlier about the pre-24-week losses and post-24-week losses is really important, and that's where it can be really difficult to manage when people are kind of either on the cusp or, you know, not quite sure. So a separate policy for stillbirth that covers maternity rights and what they're entitled to, a separate policy for pre-24-week losses that sets out some sort of guidance around leave. So with Zurich, we went through an exercise to introduce a parental leave policy, and one of those policies is baby loss leave, and that talks about 10 days leave, no questions asked, but it also talks about discretion, because we know that every circumstance is different, and we know that there is the ability to take additional kind of paid sick leave for an early loss. But it's, as Daria said, it's not just about the policies. It has to come with training and awareness of your HR professionals who may be answering those calls, and of the managers who line manage individuals. A bit like Daria, I always use my story about my phone call and say, if somebody phoned you tomorrow and told you they'd lost their baby, would you know what to say and do? And if the answer is no, then you absolutely need to not only know a policy, but also have an awareness of why baby loss is so unique. I think, people sometimes try and compare it to bereavements they've had of family members or pets. We've heard stories like that. Baby loss really is incredibly unique because it's not in the right order. It's not something you expect to happen. It's normally in a very traumatic circumstance. So I just think understanding that, to know how to enact a policy and use your judgment against that policy is very important.
And Daria, so tell us about the changes that you've made through your work at the Bank of England.
Yeah, so after I returned to work following my loss, I was really compelled almost to put in place some sort of provision, having, like I said at the beginning, met an underworld of women that had gone through different losses, and also sort of under 24 weeks as well. Soon transpired that not only did we not have a sort of standalone policy for bereavement over 24 weeks, because that was in the maternity policy, we also didn't have anything in place for under 24 weeks. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't have given people time off. It just means that it was discretionary, and that would rely very much on the line manager and the personalities of the people in your team who you're working with. And I didn't like leaving that sort of thing to chance. I didn't think that was right. And as Donna alluded to, whether there are different, well, I think, again, back to misconceptions. I've met women, my sister, it's amazing how once you start talking about this, how people start opening up around you. A very close family member had gone through a loss as well, not even that long ago. And what you forget to realize, even in the second trimester, you could be giving birth. There could still be contractions. There could still be a real physical, painful journey, trauma. And so I don't think it's good enough to sort of say under 24 weeks, no, sorry, discretionary leave. I just felt that was absolutely wrong. And I was very compelled to try to find a way to investigate, but also bring together a policy. And knowing the type of organisation I'm in, very data driven, people like analysis. We need to have a real good story behind why we're doing this. How does this connect to the bank's vision? The type of bank we want to stand for, all of those sorts of things I had to think about in bringing that narrative together to take it through governance. And it wasn't enough to just share my story. I was very open about sharing my story. I became quite rehearsed at this point, but then I started to collect other colleagues that had been through been through a baby loss of any gestation. I had, early loss, or tried to get case studies together of all these different elements to really bring it to life. And I think that really got the message home, especially when I was trying to change hearts and minds around why we need this. What we ended up with, if I think about the drafts, hundreds of drafts to get to the final policy, what was the right vehicle, consulting with our legal, consulting with finance. Is there an implication of bringing in place a policy like this? Can we afford it? Real practical things, which, of course, we want the best of any solution, but we also it has to be practical, it has to work, it has to be operationalized with systems and things like that. So we ended up with something that I think is quite market competitive and quite generous. So we've got 1 month, again, no questions asked, leave and fully paid for anyone going through a loss, whether that's a partner going through a loss at home, whether that's you yourself at work going through the loss. All bank employees have that from day one. There isn't it's very much a trust relationship. we like to hope that people aren't going to, exploit this policy, but it is very much there to support everyone. And we've tried to make it really easy to enact so that there's a system code. Again, it is up to the individual. Not everyone has to use the full 4 weeks. You can use it in increments however you like. And I also was conscious, back to Donna's point at the beginning, you may be going through this kind of grief or this kind of recovery for a long period of time. So if you don't need to take it in that first month, but perhaps like Donna said, you realize a month down the line or 2 months, I'm not okay, you can enact it that later on. So I think we included a sort of 56-week period, which would also include the first anniversary or say the due date that you might have had, so that you've got that coverage and you can take it flexibly. And I think that's really important, that it is flexible and it can be adjusted to the individual and what they need. Do you need a week? Do you need a day? Do you need a month? And then, of course, you've got all the additional things that you can take on top of the parental bereavement leave and pay, which might be sick leave, or it might be more discretionary leave. And that's really a conversation with the manager. So that's what we came out with. But the number one real sort of vehicle for us was having a community. And I think that started small and has quadrupled in volunteering effort in 3 years. So we're now got in terms of a project size, we've got something like 40 people actively working on fertility, pregnancy and baby loss related campaigns, whether that's Fertility Awareness Week, Baby Loss Awareness Week, rolling out the training that we created ourselves based on our own lived experience. And we're delivering the training sessions now. We're at that point of the maturity in this whole sort of process that we're able to do that, but it's taken time, and we have worked with lots of charities as well, and we continue to work with charities. I think that's really important. But yeah, the community and the case studies was really what sort of brought the message home, I think, and really started to change culture and hearts and minds. And I can tell you very quickly that one of the first, I remember the first time putting a meeting in the diary to talk about baby loss, I was contacted to say, are you sure that should be a public meeting? Do you want to mark it as private? I'm not sure we should have that open. So again, it just goes to show the sort of really early perception of we shouldn't really be loud about this, we shouldn't be talking about this, can you make it private, and not being able to have spaces that were too visible and all of those kind of things, trying to keep it a little bit hidden. I think as the psychological safety has grown, so too has our voice and our community around this topic.
You're absolutely doing a brilliant amount of work there, Daria, so congratulations on everything that you've been doing despite the reason for it in the first place. Donna, how does that compare or contrast from what you've done at Zurich? And tell us also about, you're doing a lot of workplace training now through Aching Arms as well. So you're clearly, both of you, trying to educate as many workplaces as possible in this.
Yeah, so as I said, we went through the journey with Zurich back in 2019 to introduce our new policies. And it was at that point that Zurich partnered with Aching Arms to design and deliver our kind of first baby loss awareness training for managers. And it was excellently received by the teams involved in it. It was a hard session. We had some people who had to opt out because they found that it was personal and difficult, not even them sharing anything, just hearing and talking, opening the conversation about it. So there's something to be very mindful about that. So since then, Aching Arms has developed its workplace training. It provides policy guidance, so it's got kind of best in class policies that we can help and look at what companies currently have and help them make something that's a bit more appropriate for the future. And then we've delivered countless training sessions across all sorts of different organisations to talk about baby loss. Some very bespoke. We've been into individual companies that are quite small that have had a loss that want everybody to know about what they can do and how they can support somebody before they come back, right through to every manager across large government organisations. We also counter that with the other services that Aching Arms offer. So Jane, you talked about our bears. That was where it started. So we give bears out to 190, I think now, of the NHS hospitals across the UK. It's nearly all of them. And these comfort bears are a gift from one parent to another, so one family to another, to let them know that they're not alone. It's dedicated in the name of their child to this other family. But it stimulates a conversation before they leave the hospital about mental health. and about where they're going to go when they leave the hospital, gives them something tangible to hold, but also with the tag on it, which talks about the fact that there's a supporting arms service, and Aching Arms provides this service to anybody. So we have managers that call after they've had an employee phone up, but we have a lot of parents and grandparents that phone as well to get support from us. And we have a dads group that provides support for dads to come together. We also have sessions where people can come together, be together events they're called, where families can come together, do an activity and just be around other people that have experienced the same thing. And we think all of those are quite complementary, because actually you can have a workplace training, you can have a good policy, but actually people still need support, and how do you kind of send them to the right place? And that's what our supporting arms service does as well. People can also request bears directly, so we get kind of thousands of requests every year for bears directly posted, and we put no limit on the timescales for grief, so it doesn't matter when people have lost their baby, they can come to us at any point and request a bear, and we'll send one to them free of charge.
Donna, I still have my bear, so that was also my first sort of real introduction to charities in the baby loss kind of space, and being in the hospital walking out with a bear, and my daughter got a bear as well, so very, very special and irreplaceable, those bears, to us and our family, because they were in the room with our baby at the time. And like you say, it's that comfort, tangible thing. So yeah, I personally have my own bear with the little Aching Arms ribbon on it. So yeah.
Thanks, Daria.
You talked there, Donna, about training small businesses, because obviously both of you are in very large organizations, but you know, this can happen in any type of business. Small businesses, how can they deal with this issue if it happens within, you know, they've got sort of 10 or 20 employees or whatever? Is the best place for them to sort of seek help at that stage a charity like Aching Arms? Because they might not have policies on this at all. They might not have many policies at all, full stop, I guess.
I think everything we've spoken about so far, about being empathetic, having kind of open communication, taking the lead from the individual that's been impacted, you know, partner or birth parent, they all stand. And I think if you can bring those skill sets to your leadership in any organisation, big or small, then you're more likely to have a positive outcome for somebody that's lost a baby, irrelevant of whether the policy sits behind it or not. So I think it's bringing that to your organisation. But yes, absolutely, you know, sometimes it could be too late. You can already have said something awful. We get a lot of, at least, you know, you got pregnant, or at least you can have another baby. Those things are incredibly damaging. So it can be too late once you've already had that conversation and said something that you didn't quite mean, that was quite upsetting to somebody. But actually, you know, you can still reach out, you can still get the guidance and support to make sure that you're supporting, and we can do that via our helpline, or there's a wonderful number of charities in this sector depending on the individual circumstance. So Aching Arms will talk to any loss at any stage, irrelevant of how it's happened, but you know, there are lots of other charities that we also signpost to that provide very dedicated support for very unique circumstances from a baby loss perspective.
Yeah. And Daria, we also talked about that wider circle of people who are impacted by this. So the partner, your partner, Liam, runs the podcast, Dad's Still Standing. You know, that's difficult too. There might be, you know, somebody who is looking forward to being a grandparent who's still in the workplace, and that's obviously then not come to fruition. So it's about thinking wider than the individual who's actually suffered the physical and loss as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's exactly that. It's acknowledging, and even when you're writing a communication, maybe you might be hosting a free webinar like this today, on you know, and inviting colleagues in your company to join in and listen. When you're writing that communication, inviting them, you might want to say, you know, we know that there are grandparents, we know that you may have had a sibling. Really acknowledge that up front, that who you're targeting, which is that basically anyone impacted by this. And I think partners is the big one for me, because often, although they're back at work and seemingly back to normal, there's a lot going on, sort of mental health, but also sort of being a caregiver to other family members, and having to just hold everyone, you know, that often happens, is the sort of partner role of holding the whole universe together while everything's falling apart. So that toll is huge. And often gets overlooked. So having targeted content and sessions and awareness raising for partners is really important. But even if you're just tapping them on the shoulder and saying, look, I know you've got a lot on at home, and sort of really acknowledging that empathetic approach, that compassionate sort of leadership and or management towards that person is just, it could be the small things like that, that person will go home and it will be a positive action for that person, whereas just not acknowledging and the silence is almost worse. But yeah, you're right, it sort of reverberates across everything: home life, family life, other siblings. I had an 11-year-old who witnessed my whole loss because I was having a home birth, so double trauma. And so actually we used Petals as a counselling, family counselling charity, couples counselling, but also my daughter had sessions as well, so we all were helped. Having that immediate sort of counselling was really, really, I think one of the reasons we're still together and has kept our family strong, because there are differences in grief. And, you know, I was very frustrated with my partner. Why is he not grieving the same way as me? Why is he not angry with certain people in the family like I am? You know, we were going through very different emotions. And again, it's back to the seesaw analogy of, well, I'm down, he's up, and when he's down, I'm up. And it's kind of, he, as he would say if he was here, you know, we can't both afford to be down. We've got another child, our mental health, we've got other things that need to happen, paying bills, you know, all those kind of things. So it's just acknowledging the impact, but also it's going to feel like there are differences at times.
And that's very important to acknowledge, Donna, isn't it? That the two, if you have a partner, that you might be experiencing this in a very, very different way.
Yeah, Aching Arms, we've focused in on dads over the last couple of years because we've got some amazing fundraising dads who want to come and tell their story, and that's really powerful for other dads to hear that, you know, people do talk about it and that it's not a taboo subject, but also because we've recognised that their grief is very different and it runs in a different way perhaps to the birth parent. So we've launched a dad's guide this year, which can be given alongside our teddies, and it was written by one of the dads that volunteers with us, and it's a guide about how it feels, but also a practical workbook for dads to work through. We've had great feedback on people just feeling, oh my God, there's something for me. There's something for me as a dad, that they're recognising that this has happened to me as well. And also our dads group has been really successful in bringing dads together. We get a lot of people that maybe sit on it and don't talk, and we have some really vocal dads, and actually just having that community. And Daria, you touched on it earlier, you know, communities, people around you that are talking about it, that have been there, is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think you're right. It has to be sometimes separating the partners out sometimes, because I remember Liam not coming along to my support groups, very much silent in the background while all the sort of women were talking, and he didn't feel like it was a place for him, but he was there as my emotional support. But actually for him, podcasts, because they're very active while they're running, while they're walking, while they're sort of, you know, doing practical things, were a good way to feel connected to baby loss and also maybe listen to other dads. So yeah, my partner set up a podcast for that reason, just as a different channel that maybe would attract sort of partners that maybe are driving in the car and that's the only solace they have is actually, like, you know, being alone in the car, and the only time they can really cry, or, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's important to have the communities, but also different channels for that grief as well.
And Daria, did you build the partners' experience into the policy work that you've done at Bank of England as well?
Yeah, definitely. So having learned this sort of seesaw of things, but also that, you know, the kind of needs really can be different, and just acknowledging that, making it also gender neutral, acknowledging that no, it's not always, you know, a heterosexual couple. There are different family shapes and sizes, so making sure that when we talk about partners, we're really inclusive. It's not just fathers. Of course, that's my lived experience with my partner who is a father, but that might be different for others. So being really inclusive in language and having different support for different sort of setup, family setups really. There might be people with other children, or it could be grandparents, could be adoptive parents. There's lots of different things to consider in the guidance, but yeah, partners is really key.
Yeah. And Donna, and just if anybody has a question, by the way, please pop it into the comments now, because we'll probably we've got about another sort of 5 or 10 minutes on the conversation. So if you do have a burning question to us, please do pop it in, and we'll do our best to answer it. Hopefully, we've covered a lot though in the conversation that we've had. Donna, you were saying that your experience of baby loss that you've talked about today, that was 10 years ago. During that 10 years, would you mind me asking, what are the other sort of moments? Because it doesn't just, as you say, it's not a one-off incident, it's something that you carry with you. So are there other times during that 10 years where, you felt that you did need to talk to your employer about what you were feeling and what you were going through?
Yeah, probably a prime example was the 10-year anniversary just gone. It felt like such a huge milestone. So that was in November last year. It felt like such a huge milestone. And a bit like you said, Daria, earlier, it felt like 5 minutes ago, but also I couldn't believe it had been 10 years. And I changed teams. So my team didn't know what had happened to me. And for me, it was about talking about it. They all got behind me and got involved in Miles of Memory, which is an October walking challenge, or cycling, swimming, whatever you want to do, miles in memory. And my lovely team walked around London with me with a violet bear, and we raised money for Aching Arms. And that was my way of, being able to talk about it again and being able to reflect on that period. People often find big milestones like when Violet would have gone to school, and I had other friends that were pregnant at the same time, and I saw their photos of their kids on their first day at school, and I was like, that should have been Violet, but it isn't. So it's much further reaching than you think. I think also when you're a bereaved parent, you become a bit of a magnet for other bereaved parents. So when I've had friends and family that have been through similar things, they want advice, they want to talk to you, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, but also can be quite challenging, because it brings back a lot of your own feelings and thoughts about what you went through at that time. So yeah. I think it's just being much broader in your thought process about how that experience might impact people. What I would also say is we see, and I personally felt it when I came back to work, my motivation had massively dropped and changed, and I wasn't the same person that I was before. And that work-life balance became even more important to me. And it was such a different feeling for how I felt about the workplace and my career and things like that. And it took a while. I went on to have my daughter, and then came back to work. And it really took me a few years to go, oh no, I'm back. Like, I'm in it. I want to do this work thing again, and I want to do it properly. So I think just reflecting on that and thinking about where people's motivations might be as time goes on, and as they kind of learn to understand their grief and understand their priorities following that kind of life-changing traumatic experience.
Yeah, because I guess managers could make quite awful judgments at that stage, couldn't they? I mean, Daria, I don't know if people are, sacked if they don't get back to the way they were working before, but it's a potential, isn't it? If you never quite regain that resolve in your workplace. And again, I guess that comes down to having a supportive employer who's listened, who's understood, and who's with you on that journey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was put in completely the wrong role, very failing project, quick, get in there. We need you to do daily stand-ups, like go kind of project on my first sort of return to work after pregnancy loss, which was just the wrong project for me, But there is something about checking, like you said, motivations, Donna, and for me, I'm different now. I'm also attracted to different sort of work as well, purpose driven, or I need space to channel this, whatever this is, into something. For me, it was, okay, I've got my day job, but I need to have something on the side that I can do, which is connecting with my community. And work, fortunately, were really supportive of that being during work time. So I could set up a community, I could, navigate a project around this. And actually, the overall benefit for the bank, it improves the employee value proposition, because it helps bring about the cultural change at the bank wants. So, having a more inclusive, diverse workplace. well, this is a way of doing that. So I could find a way to connect what I wanted with the bank's mission as well, which is really important. But yeah, I think it's just recognizing people aren't going to want to go straight into, and be gentle on them if you are allocating projects and work, and you maybe remove some duties. It is about having that. For me, I think we put in our policy a phased return is recommended, and even if it's just an option that is discussed, I think it should be always on the table, because there is an expectation to kind of, when is normal, and is there a normal? Because, you know, what is the normal you're trying to return to? Life after loss is very complicated. So I think, especially if you've been through trauma. So yeah.
And I had a 2.5-year-old at the time, and I was working almost full time, having coming back. I was a 1.5 years back from mat leave, and on my first phased return week back, I asked to drop my hours down to 2.5 days. I just said I want to be at home because my son's really important to me. Totally changed my outlook, and I'd never done that before my loss, but that felt really important and right to me. So having things like flexible working and opening those conversations, like you said, Daria, is really important.
Yeah, like, what do you need to be kind to yourself, you know, and you know, and workplaces shouldn't be afraid of that, because I think they sometimes feel like, if I give you too much, you know, flexibility or too much, you're not going to want to come back fully. And it's not about that. If you want people, if you want retention, a happy, engaged workforce, well-being should be at the forefront of everything. If you don't do that, as you said, Donna, and I think statistics are quite stark, you will lose probably half of your workforce that have gone through a baby loss, because you have that, you know, it is a loyalty thing as well. So
Listen, thank you both of you for sharing your insight and you know, those personal details today. We really, really appreciate it. Perhaps we could wrap up the conversation really by just asking you what you would both like to leave the audience with today. Donna, you know, you've talked about this whole journey and the challenges that people face, and the amazing changes and the awareness raising that you and Daria are doing. What would you like to leave people with?
I think it's really simple. I think you just ask yourself, look at your organisation, ask yourself 2 questions. Do I have the right policies and procedures in place to support my employees at the loss of a baby at any point during their pregnancy? And secondly, do I have empathetic leaders that understand the unique nature of baby loss and how to enact that policy in a compassionate way? And if you can't say yes to both those questions, then there are things you can do, and we'd be more than happy to help you with that at Aching Arms if we could.
And Daria, thank you, Donna. Daria, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
I'd like to sort of this idea of start small and, you know, take that first step, because, you know, if I've got a whole case study that I've written on this, which has taken 3 years to get to something that's quite substantial. So day one could look like just collecting a group of people together and start building a community, which can be just a safe space to talk, and building on that over the years. You know, it might not be straight away, and I think it really depends on the type of organisation you're trying to change. It is a culture change, so just take that small step. I would always say start with a community focus before you get to policy development and other things. That is going to give you a great foundation for case studies, and also kind of collectively having a voice that is much more powerful than just you yourself. So so start small, take that first step, community.
2 great pieces of advice there. Thank you everyone for being part of this discussion today. This conversation was brought to you by Frog Systems. Our wellbeing streaming service, Ashia, is a complete on-demand platform full of personal stories, expert opinion, conversations like this one to help you be better managers, and signposted support and resources to support your employees through the life challenges that they face. Do visit our website for more, where you can also sign up for a free trial, and do follow us on our social media. Thank you so much, Donna and Daria, for sharing your insight today. We really do appreciate how open and honest you've been, and some fantastic tips for everybody to take away to hopefully implement some changes in their workplaces. Thank you, both of you. You've been amazing guests. And to everyone who's attended, I do hope that this conversation will help you to make positive changes in your workplace. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.